September 1998, Russia, Nizhny Novgorod, Leninsky District Police Department. In the interrogation room, the air is thick with irritation and frustration. The person suspected of causing someone's death refuses to confess to the crime, stalls for time, and claims to know nothing. Persuasion didn't help, and neither did threats. Even slaps, spitting, and an ashtray emptied on his head didn't help. The suspect himself, 21-year-old Aleksey Mikheev, is sitting on a chair almost without moving. His head hurts from the constant slaps and his ribs ache from the rough jabs. He has been interrogated for a whole week, being forced to confess to a crime he did not commit. The guy is still holding on for now, but he's already on the edge. Aleksey freezes when one of the investigators rolls a device with wires and electrodes into the room. The second one notices his look and smirks. That's right, it's exactly what you're thinking. They roll the device closer. Aleksey tries to dodge when they stick the terminals to his earlobes with glue, but he can't do anything. His hands, cuffed behind his back, are locked together. So, are you going to write a confession or should we turn on the electricity? One of the investigators asks. Don't think you can handle it, adds the second. After the electricity, everyone confesses. The suspect refuses. The investigators send electric current through him and a violent convulsion runs through the guy's body. After a short time, Aleksey Mikheev is ready to confess to anything. He takes the blame for a crime he didn't commit. He makes up details about the abuse and murder of a girl who wasn't even 18. In a matter of moments, an ordinary 21-year-old guy turns himself into a criminal with his own hands. The investigators are right. After electric torture, everyone confesses. Aleksey Mikheev was born in 1976 in Nizhny Novgorod. He had a loving family. His mother adored the boy and spoiled him, and Aleksey responded with affection and later with care. Back in first grade, Lesha became friends with Ilya Frolov. The boys sat together at the same desk and were inseparable. They were lucky in the army too. They ended up serving together. It seemed like this was a friendship for life. Aleksey's military service took place during the turbulent 90s. There was a rampant crime and widespread corruption in the government. Mikheev saw all of this with his own eyes. Nevertheless, the young man wanted to serve in law enforcement. Right after the army, after graduating from the police academy, Mikheev got a job as a traffic police inspector. Mikheev was described positively by his colleagues at work. He was a calm, non-confrontational guy who never raised his voice. Among the other employees, he was considered an ordinary worker. He did his job as expected. He didn't try to curry favor with the management, but he also didn't achieve anything noteworthy. In 1998, Mikheev got his own car. Together with Ilya Frolov, they often drove around the city and met girls. Mikheev was in no hurry to start a serious relationship. The 21-year-old guy had all his youth ahead of him. That day, September 8, 1998, Ilya got into Aleksey's car with a bag full of groceries. The guys were going to take it to the dacha in Bogorodsk where Frolov's parents were. It was only 44 kilometers to the city. The weather was good and the friends were happy to go for a ride. As they approached Bogorodsk, two attractive girls were hitchhiking, Mariya Savelieva and Yulia Krylova. Mariya was not yet 18 and there is no information about Yulia's age. The guys didn't mind the company at all. The girls got into the car and a conversation started. After giving the groceries to Ilya's parents, the guys decided that they could keep hanging out. The girls didn't mind. The guys looked decent and there was still a long time until evening. The young people had a great time riding around the city. They laughed and joked. After a while, Yulia asked to be driven to her house. After saying goodbye to her friend, she got out of the car. The guys turned to Mariya. "You're not in a hurry, are you?" Mariya shook her head. "No." The car took off and headed toward Nizhny Novgorod. The group had fun until evening, but when it started to get dark, Mariya got ready to go home. Now she turned to Mikheev. Let's go back to Bogorodsk. I'll come home late. My parents will worry. Tired after a busy day, Aleksey protested. Let's do it tomorrow. I'm tired. You can spend the night at my place. I live with my parents. Everyone's at home. You have nothing to be afraid of. But Mariya refused. She didn't want to spend the night at the place of an almost stranger, and she didn't really believe the story about the parents either. Aleksey seemed decent and didn't get handsy, and besides, he mentioned that he worked at the traffic police, but Mariya didn't want to take the risk. Drop me off at the bus stop. I'll spend the night at my friend's place, the girl said to Mikheev. There was a bus stop nearby. Mariya said goodbye to her new acquaintances and walked away. Mikheev was almost certain that he would never see Mariya again. Mobile phones like pagers were a real rarity back then, and he didn't ask the girl's address in Bogorodsk. How many fleeting acquaintances like that happen in life? This wasn't the first, and definitely not the last. Aleksey was wrong. He would remember this acquaintance forever, and in a way, it would become his last. On September 10, 1998, Aleksey Mikheev went to work for his shift. Closer to the end of the workday, criminal investigation officers approached the young man. The conversation was brief. Please come with us. Mikheev obeyed the officers without protest, although he had no idea what was happening. He tried to ask questions, but they just pushed him in the back. Questions later. Without drawing up a detention report and without explaining the reasons, Aleksey was put into a police UAZ vehicle. There, Ilya Frolov was already sitting, handcuffed to the bars. The events were unfolding extremely quickly and in an almost surreal way. From the conversations of the guards, Aleksey realized that they were being taken to Bogorodsk and that they had been detained on suspicion of sexually assaulting and killing Mariya Savelieva. The guys exchanged glances. They both immediately remembered the girl who had been brought to Nizhny Novgorod 2 days ago. In Bogorodsk, Mikheev and Frolov were taken to the main police department building for questioning by investigator Naumov. There, they learned that this morning Mariya Savelieva's mother had filed a report about her daughter's disappearance. They quickly found her friend Yulia, who reported that 2 days ago Masha went to Nizhny Novgorod with 2 guys, one of whom, Aleksey, said he worked for the traffic police. Yulia gave a detailed description of Aleksey's car and even remembered a couple of digits from the license plate. This time, the police processed the report surprisingly quickly. A bulletin was issued immediately, and Aleksey Mikheev's identity was established literally within a couple of hours. Mikheev, having recovered from the initial shock, immediately tried to point out an important detail to the investigators. A criminal case cannot be initiated under circumstances that do not contain a direct indication of a crime. Mariya left home and did not return, but that did not mean anything yet. There was neither a witness to any abuse, nor, even more so, a body. The girl might not have warned anyone about her plans, she might have suspected something, or she might have been guilty of something herself, but not warning anyone does not make her guilty. The police, for the most part, could only consider her guilty of what she might have done. Besides, the procedure for declaring a person missing is only possible 3 days after their disappearance, at the time of detention. In fact, it wasn't even possible to open a missing person case yet regarding the girl's disappearance. But it seemed that no one was listening to or hearing Mikheeva. Without any formal charges, he and Ilya Frolov were placed in a pre-trial detention center. Since there were no legal grounds to keep the guys in the temporary detention facility, they were charged with an administrative offense. Allegedly, they resisted the police officers. That same day, they put a stack of papers from his own department in front of Mikheev, documents for his dismissal from the force. The order was signed on August 17, and Aleksey was persistently asked to sign wherever necessary. Why? But I'm not guilty of anything. The guy didn't understand. He was immediately told that the order and other documents were just pieces of paper, and that if it turned out he wasn't involved in the death of Mariya Savelieva, these papers would simply be destroyed. But if Mikheev turned out to be a criminal, it would be better if, at the time the crime was committed, he was no longer listed as an employee of the traffic police. The State Traffic Inspectorate didn't need another stain on its reputation. I didn't feel any guilt, so it wasn't hard for me to sign the paper. Out of foolishness, out of naivety, I was only 21 years old, I resigned on the spot, recalled Mikheev later. At that time, in September 1998, without obtaining the necessary warrants, investigators from the Bogorodsk Police Department, Dunayev, Naumov and Tulchenko conducted searches in the apartment where Mikheev lived with his parents, as well as at the dacha, garage and car. In Mikheev's car, they found several pistol cartridges, which was more than enough grounds to open a criminal case. The reports documenting the discovery and seizure of the cartridges were drawn up in the investigator's office, where they invited witnesses. A knowingly false protocol on an administrative offense was also drawn up there. This protocol stated that on the evening of September 11, 1998, Mikheev and Frolov committed a public order offense at the train station. The administrative case was sent to the Bogorodsky District Court, where on the same day a decision was made to impose an administrative penalty in the form of 5 days of arrest. Immediately after that, Mikheev and Frolov were told that they were being accused of sexually assaulting Mariya Savelieva and causing her death. The officers advised the guys to confess everything immediately. Write a confession. A sincere admission of guilt will reduce your punishment. Mikheev refused. Frolov did too. Both guys insisted that they were innocent, and soon their stubbornness started to irritate the investigators. They started using threats, but even those didn't help. Mikheev demanded a lawyer, just like Frolov, but both of them were refused again and again. There was no one to protect them. The investigators grew bolder and bolder. Scuffles and slaps began. Then they simply started beating him. They mocked him to his face. They poured whiskey into an ashtray, then spat in it. The officers behaved arrogantly and provocatively. It seemed like they weren't afraid of anything. They weren't afraid that an innocent man was sitting in front of them, and that Mariya Savelieva could come home alive and well as soon as tomorrow. It was as if they had been given a task that had to be completed no matter what. Very soon, Mikheev would realize that this was exactly the case. The term of administrative detention was coming to an end, and Ilya Frolov had to be released. Mikheev, however, was detained again. The body of Mariya Savelieva was never found, but the conveniently discovered cartridges in his car played their part. On September 16, 1998, a criminal case was opened for illegal possession of ammunition. Mikheev was placed in custody in a temporary detention facility. Ilya Frolov was summoned to the Leninsky District Police Department for questioning as a witness. There, during the interrogation, he was detained again and questioned regarding the disappearance of Mariya Savelieva. I don't know whether he was tortured or if he gave testimony on his own. Mikheev will tell us later. But Frolov identified me as the culprit. He said that I forced him to participate. Ilya Frolov stated that Mikheev forced him, through threats, to take part in the abuse of Mariya Savelieva, and then also forced him, through threats, to participate in causing her death. Frolov described everything vividly, in detail. How Mariya resisted, how she was in agony, how they hid the body. He even described where Mikheev hid the corpse. That same day, an investigative team went to the specified location, but of course they didn't find the body. But Mikheev's fate had already changed drastically. After Frolov wrote a confession, they stopped being gentle with Mikheev. He was beaten again, spat in the face and on the head, slapped and poked under the ribs. The demand was the same: confess, write a confession. Mikheev stubbornly refused. They told me, of course we won't cripple you with our own hands, he recalled later. We'll put you in a cell with repeat offenders. If you don't confess tomorrow either, then tomorrow your cellmates will find out that you're a former police officer and that you're in for sexual assault. Imagine what they'll do to you. According to the law, former law enforcement officers must be kept separate from other criminals. Mikheev tried to remind them about this, but no one listened to him. The threats and beatings continued. On September 17, 1990, Aleksey Mikheev was finally allowed to see a lawyer with whom Aleksey's mother had made an agreement regarding the case about possession of ammunition. Aleksey immediately explained to his lawyer that the investigator was not interested in the ammunition and that all the interrogations were about the disappearance of Mariya Savelieva. The lawyer listened carefully and then said that, according to the agreement, she could only work on the case concerning the discovered ammunition. As for Savelieva, she was not paid for that, and she does not have the appropriate warrant. The lawyer did not come to the pretrial detention center anymore since the investigator denied her the right to visit. Between September 17 and 19, Aleksey Mikheev was subjected to intensive interrogations. Although he was detained for possession of ammunition, he was interrogated by investigators in connection with the disappearance of Savelieva. All this time, Aleksey was subjected to torture with demands that he confirm the testimony of Ilya Frolov. One of the most brutal methods was electric torture. During this, Aleksey sat handcuffed to a chair and metal clips from electric wires were attached to his ears. Electricity was passed through his body again and again. The current went through his brain. The guy started having convulsions. His eyelids and body muscles twitched. Aleksey writhed in the chair while the officers just watched him and exchanged comments. "If his tongue falls back, we'll have to pull it out with a pin," one of them remarked cynically. "You'd better confess or we'll attach the wires to your genitals."
That is, they connect it to the area of the brain. That is, the short circuit goes through the brain. It affects the brain, the central nervous system. That is, the discharge goes through the whole body. That is, it happens at a frequency of 50 Hertz. So, how much electricity do we have here? The frequency in the outlets is 50, that means it shakes 50 times per second. That is, every muscle. That means each muscle starts contracting 50 times per second.
By that time, Aleksey was already exhausted both morally and physically. The pain from the electric shocks was unbearable. Several times he simply lost consciousness. The words and laughter of the investigator were ringing in his ears. Convulsions would periodically run through his body. "Come on, Mikheev, confess. You did it." And the guy couldn't take it anymore. "I did." On September 19, 1998, Aleksey Mikheev wrote a confession in which he incriminated himself and admitted to assaulting Mariya Savelieva as well as taking her life. When the paper was written, satisfaction appeared on the investigators' faces. A short time later, Mikheev was lifted from his chair and taken to another office. There were people sitting there, employees of the prosecutor's office and the police, including the senior police investigator, the deputy head of the district police department, the deputy regional prosecutor, the prosecutor of the city of Bogorodsk, and several employees of the Leninsky district police department. Mikheev recognized Deputy Regional Prosecutor Muravyeva and a couple of other people by sight. Maybe this was his chance, his only chance to be saved. When the questions started coming, he turned to the Deputy Prosecutor Muravyev and said clearly, "I was tortured. All the confessions were beaten out of me." The men seemed to freeze in place. Aleksey continued. He talked about being tortured with electricity, about threats, about how he was forced to incriminate himself because it was simply impossible to endure anymore. But with every word he spoke, he realized it's useless. There is no hope of escape. The deputy prosecutor acted as if he didn't hear Aleksey at all. He didn't react to the words of the exhausted guy. When Mikheev fell silent in exhaustion, the officers who had interrogated him earlier entered the room. The deputy prosecutor turned to them. "Apparently the guy didn't understand anything. Take him back to where you brought him from." Mikheev was lifted from the chair and led away. He was brought back into the same room where he had been tortured and seated on a chair. "What, did you decide to complain to the prosecutor?" He gave the order himself. "Do you think anything happens here without his knowledge?" they asked Mikheev cynically. Now he understood where such brazenness and confidence in their own impunity came from. Everything was done on the orders of a higher-ranking official. Mikheev suddenly realized clearly he was doomed. No one would come to his aid. If he doesn't confess, they'll simply torture him to death. The investigators sensed that the suspect was breaking and didn't hesitate to take advantage of it. After conferring, they made a new proposal. Mikheev had to confess to 4 more similar crimes or the torture would continue. The exhausted guy's vision went dark. 4 more bodies. They were going to turn him into a real serial criminal, but he no longer had the strength to resist. The thought of another electric torture made him break out in a cold sweat, and his brain was already refusing to think clearly. "I agree," Mikheev forced out. The investigators were pleased. Several cases will be solved at once. The maniac will go behind bars and someone will get a promotion for good results. But to make it convincing, they really needed Savelieva's body. They started putting pressure on Mikheev again, threatening him. The guy, exhausted by torture, didn't understand what they wanted from him. He agreed to take the blame for 4 similar crimes. He would have agreed to 4 more. But Mikheev couldn't produce the body of a person he hadn't even touched. He felt cornered. The realization that all of this was real grew stronger in him with every second. He will go to prison, most likely for life. He will spend the rest of his years in prison. The thought horrified him. When the investigators were distracted, overcome by pain, panic, and the desire to end his suffering, the guy jumped up from his chair and rushed to the office window. No one managed to stop him. Smashing the glass with his head, Aleksey Mikheev jumped out of the window and, falling onto a police motorcycle parked in the yard, suffered a severe lumbar spine fracture with spinal cord damage and other injuries, and lost consciousness. The investigators immediately called an ambulance. Mikheev, who was still unconscious, was taken to hospital number 39. His mother arrived there soon after. There was a guard standing outside the room where Aleksey was lying. The woman was horrified. Her son was being watched like a dangerous criminal. But she was even more horrified when she saw Aleksey himself. The young man had burns from electrode clips on his ears, and his body was covered in bruises. Her son looked as if he had been through torture. That's exactly what happened. Moreover, after the fall, the lower half of his body was paralyzed. All the organs and muscles below the fracture site were affected. Aleksey couldn't feel his legs and couldn't control his urination. The woman rushed to the doctors. "The injury needs to be documented. My son was beaten." The doctor who examined the newly arrived patient agreed that there really were burns. But this information was not included in the medical record. Aleksey's mother tried to talk to the chief doctor, but that didn't help either. No one wanted trouble with the police. Doctors found it easier to ignore what was happening. That day, none of the doctors examined Aleksey. He was lying there alone, unable to feel his legs, and from time to time nurses would carefully check on him to change his bedpan or bring him food. They also neglected him the following day. And only on the 3rd day did the doctors come into the ward, examine him, and schedule him for surgery. It was then that Aleksey noticed there was no longer a guard outside the ward. He asked what had happened. The answer was simply shocking. Mariya Savelieva turned up alive and unharmed. As it turned out, the girl returned home on September 19th. To her shocked mother and the frightened investigator, she said that on the evening of September 8, 1998, Aleksey Mikheev, his friend, and she were driving around Nizhny Novgorod together. He suggested that the girl spend the night at his place, but she refused. Aleksey dropped her off at a bus stop and drove away. Mariya went to her friends who lived in Nizhny Novgorod, where she spent all those 10 days. As it turned out, the girl lost some kind of gold jewelry along the way. Afraid that her parents would start scolding her, she decided to stay with her friends for a while. Since Mariya's parents didn't have a home phone, the girl couldn't let them know where she was. On September 21, 1998, the arrest of Aleksey Mikheev was formally cancelled. On September 22, Aleksey underwent spinal surgery, but his spinal cord had already been irreversibly damaged. No surgery or rehabilitation could undo the harm that had been caused. Aleksey Mikheev stayed in the hospital until February 3, 1998. He returned home disabled. On September 25, 1998, the criminal case number 22,346, initiated on suspicion of assaulting Mariya Savelieva and causing her death, was closed. Aleksey Mikheev was brought in as a suspect for the illegal possession of cartridges, but this case also had to be closed, since at the time the cartridges were found, he was a police officer and therefore had the right to carry a weapon. All those involved in the investigation of the disappearance of Mariya Savelieva realized that the case was taking a bad turn. The criminal cases were falling apart one after another. People started talking about Aleksey's case, and human rights activists began to get involved. The case was gaining publicity. The higher authorities demanded that they figure out what was going on. It was urgent to save the reputation of the investigation. The prosecutor of Nizhny Novgorod tried to save the situation. On March 1, 1999, a criminal case was opened regarding the abduction of Mariya Savelieva. However, even here the charges fell apart almost immediately. Mariya said that Aleksey did not hold her against her will. She came to Nizhny Novgorod with him of her own accord. And when she refused to stay the night at his place, the guy drove her to the bus stop and said goodbye. On September 21, 1998, an investigator from the prosecutor's office of the Leninsky district opened a criminal case regarding the fall of Aleksey Mikheev from the window. 5 officers from the Leninsky District Police Department who participated in the interrogation on September 19, 1998 were questioned as witnesses. All of them, as expected, stated that they did not torture Aleksey Mikheev and did not see anyone else torturing him. They said the interrogation was conducted strictly in accordance with the law. The investigator told Mikheev that Ilya Frolov had confessed to being an accomplice in the abuse and causing the death of Mariya Savelieva, and that the best option would be to confess. The interrogation was interrupted to have some tea. While the officers were busy making tea, Mikheev suddenly jumped up from his chair, ran to the window, broke the glass, and jumped out. The doctor who examined Aleksey Mikheev on the day he was brought to the hospital was also questioned. He confirmed that Mikheev's mother mentioned some burns on her son's ears. However, all the young man's injuries were caused by falling out of the window. Fractures, hematomas, bruises, and wounds. According to the medical records, during the physical examination, no burns were found on his earlobes. Mikheev's hospital roommate said that he saw burns on Aleksey's ears. In his opinion, such burns could have been caused by electric shocks. The man worked as an electrician and knew what kind of burns could be caused by electrical wires. But the words of the roommate were not enough to press charges. On December 21, 1998, the investigator closed the criminal case against the police officers due to the absence of a crime. The decision to close the case was overturned 3 times. The case was sent for further investigation, but the result was always the same. The torture claims were not substantiated. It turned out that Aleksey jumped out of the window of his own free will, guided by his personal attitude toward the situation based on the specific psychological traits of his personality. When it turned out that Ilya Frolov had never been questioned as a witness during the investigative actions, the decision to close the criminal case was overturned for the 4th time. The case was once again sent for further investigation, during which the young man stated that he was indeed beaten at the Bogorodsk police station. They demanded the same thing from him as from Mikheev, a confession to sexually assaulting Mariya Savelieva and causing her death. Frolov said that from September 16 to 19, 1998, he was constantly interrogated at the Leninsky District Police Department of Nizhny Novgorod. During the interrogation, senior police investigator Bill shook him and also said that Ilya would be tortured with electricity if he didn't confess. In addition, they threatened to put him in a cell with a tuberculosis patient and to tell his cellmates that he had assaulted a minor. Under psychological pressure, Frolov broke down. That's why he falsely accused Mikheev. Frolov's testimony was not taken into account. The criminal case against the investigators who tortured Mikheev was once again closed.
I can tell you this absolutely honestly. Sometimes I was simply afraid to tell Mikheev once again, like, Lesha, your case has been closed for the 16th time. No one is to blame.
But he wasn't going to give up. On May 27, 2001, following a complaint by Aleksey Mikheev, the Nizhegorodsky District Court overturned the decision to close the case and ordered the prosecutor's office to continue the investigation. The court noted, among other things, that Aleksey Mikheev's statements were logical and detailed, and that the case should be investigated more thoroughly. The court also ruled that Aleksey Mikheev should undergo psychological and psychiatric examinations. After examining Mikheev, the specialist concluded that he was completely mentally healthy, but he had experienced psychological trauma, including trauma related to physical injury. At the time of the examination, Mikheev's mental state was characterized by euphoric reactions, gentleness and good-naturedness, emotionality, and dependence on pain and strong attachments, specifically to his mother, according to the report. The report also noted that Mikheev is currently not inclined to have thoughts of ending his own life. As for his condition at the time of the jump from the window, several years had already passed by then. It was no longer possible to draw any conclusions. On May 19, 2001, the investigation into the case was closed for the same reasons as before. After a series of refusals to investigate the criminal case, a complaint was filed with the European Court of Human Rights. Since Mikheev's condition was gradually deteriorating, in February 2003 a request was also submitted for the complaint to be considered as a priority. Taking into account the arguments presented in the application, they promised to consider the case at the earliest opportunity during 2003. A notification about this was sent to the prosecutor of the Nizhny Novgorod region. On December 17, 2003, a memorandum from the respondent state was received by the court from the authorized representative of the Russian Federation at the ECHR, Pavel Laptov. In it, the Russian authorities pointed out that the ECHR was acting prematurely. The prosecutor's office in Leninsky district, Nizhny Novgorod, is still investigating Aleksey Mikheev's torture case, Donbass. The ECHR should wait before drawing conclusions. Finally, in 2005, 7 years after the incident, the prosecutor's office did bring charges against 2 police officers who participated in the interrogation of Aleksey Mikheev on September 19, 1998. The case materials, along with the indictment, were finally sent to the Leninsky District Court of Nizhny Novgorod for consideration. On November 30, 2005, the Leninsky District Court of Nizhny Novgorod found 2 police officers, Igor Somov and Nikolai Kasterin, guilty of committing a crime under Part 3 of Article 286 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, abuse of official powers. They were sentenced to 4 years of imprisonment with a ban on holding positions in law enforcement agencies for 3 years. There is information that after serving their sentence, they got jobs in private security. The deputy head of the regional police department, Pyotr Sibirev, remained unpunished. According to Aleksey Mikheev, he could not have been unaware that torture was being used against him, yet he took no action to stop the abuse. In January 2006, the judicial panel of the Nizhny Novgorod Regional Court left the verdict unchanged, emphasizing that there is a direct link between the actions of Somov and Kasterin and the serious consequences that befell Mikheev. Almost simultaneously, on January 26, 2006, the ECHR determined that the mistreatment in this situation reached the level of torture within the meaning of Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights. In addition, the ECHR pointed out that Russia refused to provide the materials of the criminal case. A connection was found between those responsible for the investigation and those who were allegedly involved in the mistreatment of Mikheev. It was about the Deputy Regional Prosecutor Muravyov. And the Nizhny Novgorod court was extremely biased in favor of law enforcement officers. Their testimonies were fully trusted, whereas Mikheev's testimony was completely ignored. The Nizhny Novgorod court ignored the fact that documents involved in the case were falsified, including interrogation protocols, the protocol for seizing cartridges from Mikheev's car, the administrative protocol, and so on. Aleksey Mikheev was awarded monetary compensation in the amount of 250,000 euros. However, this money did not help him get back on his feet. Almost the entire amount was spent on covering medical expenses. Usually in our videos we have criminals. I try to paint a portrait of the criminal's personality, but today I'll try to paint a portrait of the victim's personality. Aleksey Mikheev did not commit murder. He became a victim of monstrous torture, fabrication, and impunity. Pressed by investigators, he incriminated himself. He made up non-existent crimes, signed a confession, and then threw himself out of a window, becoming severely disabled. Not a single real crime was ever recorded against him. Nevertheless, if I try to build a personality profile, this is what I come up with. Before the tragedy, Aleksey was a calm, friendly, and non-confrontational young man. His colleagues spoke of him with respect. He didn't stand out or curry favor, but avoided conflicts. He had a warm and close relationship with his mother, which later became the foundation of his emotional support. After the events of 1998, when he was subjected to hours of interrogations with beatings and electric torture, and then became disabled, changes occurred in his psyche. However, the examinations did not reveal any mental disorders. Aleksey remained sane and self-aware. His mental state was characterized by emotional gentleness, good-naturedness, and dependence on his mother as a stronger figure. He exhibited euphoric reactions, possibly as a psychological defense mechanism against constant pain and helplessness. At the same time, during the examination, no tendency towards suicidal thoughts was observed in him. As for diagnoses, Aleksey was not officially given any psychiatric diagnosis. It is possible that he developed post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, as a result of physical abuse and emotional catastrophe, but this is not stated directly in the report. It is only noted that he experienced severe psychological trauma. He did not become dangerous, did not become embittered, and did not seek revenge. His psyche rather shifted towards emotional vulnerability and inner kindness, despite what he had been through. As a result, we have the image of a man broken by the system. And when he escaped from that meat grinder, survived but was left confined to a wheelchair, he didn't become bitter, he just continued to live. Not as a hero, but as a man who was left with no choice. By the way, if you want to get a portrait of your personality, entertain me, of course, a portfolio, I'll probably leave a link to a post about how to do it and what you'll get under the video. Well, for more than a quarter of a century now, Aleksey has been practically bedridden. The lower part of his body doesn't function and he can't control his bowel or bladder. Aleksey lives with his retired mother. She had to quit her job to take care of her son. They no longer communicated with Ilya Frolov. Mikheev did not forgive his comrade for the slander, although he partly understood why he did it. After what happened, Frolov got a job in law enforcement, and bars were installed on the windows at the Leninsky District Police Department. Now, those who are tortured there won't be able to escape. And what do you think about this case? Leave your comments, like or dislike, and watch other videos on the channel. They are coming out. even though you don't always get notifications about it.